afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Rihanna from HR Grapevine, and today I'm here with Simon Puryer, Managing Director at iRealise. Today we're going to be talking about change. With several changes within the world of work, companies are already preparing. Whether this is in the form of embracing new technologies, implementing flexible working, or adapting your business strategy, change can sometimes be a topic of contention. For example, getting everyone on board with a new movement can be challenging, as there are so many aspects to consider, how it impacts your customers, clients, and staff, so it's really worth considering options. But how can you and should you ready your business for a new movement? That's what I'll be discussing today with Simon, who holds over 10 years of experience working on large-scale HR projects and has been awarded by the payroll industry for his expertise. He'll be discussing how business readiness approach can help you view change management in a different light. Simon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Rihanna. Good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, I'm Simon Puryer. I'm the MD for iRealise. So we're a team of business readiness experts who work with lots of companies to prepare and deliver change. We have a unique business readiness approach which helps with engagement and buy-in across all the business functions involved. And we've been doing it for over 25 years now, and it's designed to help companies land their change successfully at the first attempt. So the other point to make is that I'm also an operator at heart, so I've got a background in retail, so I've lived and breathed it, so I've sort of seen it from both sides. So I always want to make that point that I get what people are going through. So I thought we'd start with talking a bit about what we mean by change. And I suppose if I'm honest with everybody, I actually hate using the word change because I think everyone talks about change and change management. And I think that the danger is it actually means different things to different people. So if we take a kind of dictionary definition to say, you know, what do we mean by change? And when you see here on the screen, the kind of different definitions from a kind of verb and noun perspective, if you think of it, first of all, from a sort of making things different, it sort of implies that it's about making things better or fit for purpose. But likewise, the kind of process you're going to go through is all about the journey. So moving from today to the future. And I'm going to talk a little later about some of those steps that you can kind of go through and the techniques we use. But I think the key thing with this is that the driver for change is that there's often pain today and that the payoff comes from the future position. But the key thing is if it's done badly, it can create more pain. Therefore, it's really important you kind of put the emphasis on the journey you're going through and how you go about it. So I think we've got a poll just to sort of kick things off. So Rihanna.
Yep, I will launch that now. So this poll is asking you, which type of change are you dealing with right now or next? So if you could all vote now, that'd be brilliant. We'll give you a minute to select your answers. So with your experience, what kind of changes are your clients embarking on most?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, I think the whole sort of digitization is a real area of focus at the moment, but also things like legislation. So many people, you know, with legislation always kind of coming out, you're finding that more and more people are having to face that. And actually, if it's something coming out potentially from the government almost as a headline, it's like, what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
And therefore, it's about trying to kind of really understand what it means and therefore what the impact is going to be on the business. So it'll be interesting to see what comes back from everyone today, actually, in terms of those kind of changes that people are experiencing.
Absolutely. So we've got just a few more seconds left if everyone would like to vote. Okay, that's fine. So we're going to share those results. Ooh. So the majority of people say it is digitization. Yeah, like you said. Maybe.
Yeah, okay, so that's interesting. Actually, legislation is quite low, so that's also interesting. But again, new product introduction or change to customer experience. I mean, I think, you know, again, to kind of remain competitive, that's often, you know, the thing that there is a new product perhaps being introduced, or, you know, certainly if you look at a lot of the retailers, it's about how they can make that whole customer experience better. But also leadership or senior personnel changes, yeah, that's inevitably going to lead to, you know, kind of filter down the organization. So, but yeah, digitization or implementation of new systems, I'm not surprised that that comes out as the kind of, you know, one of the top ones.
Yeah, exactly. Okay,
Interesting.
Yeah,
Thank you for that,
that's
everybody.
all right.
Okay, so I suppose that the real payoff of change is about how the business and also how the individuals within an organisation grow. And I've got a few kind of quotes here, and I really like the middle one around from Jimmy Dean there saying, "I can't change the direction of the wind, but I can adjust my sails to always reach my destination." And I think that's really interesting because if you think of it in the kind of concept of often people can't necessarily change, legislation, for example, how that's coming in, but they can look at how they're going to implement it and therefore the changes they need to make. I think it's really interesting when you kind of think of it in that sort of sense. But also, I think if you look at the bottom one around imagine life without change, it would be static, boring, and dull. I think it's recognizing that actually, people do want to embrace change, and organizations have to go through change to remain competitive and, as I say, grow. But actually, individuals also want to go through a level of personal growth. So it's kind of remembering that, but it's also therefore remembering that those individuals need to be involved in that journey, and they need to be, to feel supported. And I think the big risk when people embark on a kind of big change program is that they're focusing very much on the sort of the product and the end position. They're not necessarily considering, the journey and the people and how they need to be involved in that journey. So I think, again, it is, say, just very much thinking about how you embrace the individuals and how you get them to kind of grow with the change. So we talk about change very much in the context of business readiness. And I like the phrase business readiness because actually it's about how you are readying the business for what they're about to embark on. So how you're going to kind of get the business prepared for that change. And we talk about it in these kind of three pillars. So you can see there around strategy readiness, solution readiness, and operational readiness. And I'm going to go into each of these in a bit more detail as we go through. But it's interesting when you look about the kind of pain and payoff against each of those. What's interesting is, the strategy readiness, which is very much about getting clarity, often at a senior level, around the journey you're about to embark on and where your kind of end goal is. The payoff is that you get real clarity, you get real focus on what you're trying to embark on. But the pain is getting that buy-in, getting everybody involved and getting real clarity over what you're trying to do. So if you can do it in the right way, the ultimate is you'll get that clarity, but it's recognizing that the pain will be getting the buy-in in the first place. I think when you then look at the solution, and for me, this is really the sort of the strategy is the why, the solution is the how. So this is when you get into the kind of detail. And as I say, I'll go through some more examples in a minute. The payoff of all of this, again, is getting the real focus and the understanding. But the pain is that actually you've got to really understand what happens today. So get the real reality of what your kind of current position is. So you can understand moving forwards how you can, what you're moving from. So the reality of today's operations. And the final pillar there around operational readiness, that's the what. So this is where you're kind of into almost delivery mode. And again, therefore, from a payoff point of view, you're going to get buy-in and adoption to what you're trying to deliver. But the pain is often that it's about getting the resources available, getting the kind of funding available to ensure that you're there to support you throughout that journey. So I think, again, we've got another poll, Rihanna.
Absolutely. So that's on the back of, the pain of getting buy-in from the board or whoever you're trying to get that from. And this one, we're asking what type of support is around change is hardest to get buy-in from. So we've got legislation or compliance-led change, systems, technology upgrade or install, new product development, process improvement or efficiency, and cultural change to benefit employees. So could you please select one? I'll give them a minute to answer that.
So I think, again, this will be interesting to see kind of what the results are, because I think this is where, often if you're trying to kind of go for some sort of funding within organisations, there are certain things that people are always immediately will get, support and buy-in to, whereas there are others where people will perhaps, not necessarily see the real benefit and therefore are reluctant to almost, give over some cash for it.
Exactly. You kind of have to show the commercial benefits as well.
Exactly.
And that's tough for the HR department.
Exactly. And we'll talk in a minute about how you kind of weigh up that sort of commercial side versus the the kind of benefits.
Okay, so it's been about a minute, so I'll just launch this poll. Oh. Okay, so the majority say cultural or change to benefit employees is the hardest to get buy-in from. Is that quite common?
I'm not surprised, I think, because again, that's where I guess getting a business to recognise the work that's involved, and therefore the funding that maybe need to support it. And I suppose it's harder almost to give some real sort of tangible benefits to it. People will often view it as perhaps sort of the softer side of things.
Yeah.
Therefore, they recognise in their individuals, but they're reluctant to perhaps put a huge amount of funding against it.
Exactly.
So yeah, I'm not surprised in that one again.
Of course. How would you kind of manage this then?
Well, I think ultimately you've still got to be able to show the benefits, because anything people are going to want to see the benefits it's going to bring. But I think it's recognising that the heart of every organisation is still the people.
Yeah.
So actually, some of those softer benefits will ultimately drive bigger financial gains.
Yes, absolutely.
So therefore, you've got to kind of still sell it in that context. But it's recognised that you may not be able to put. It's getting, I suppose, those senior guys to buy into the fact that putting hard deliverables against it can be difficult.
Yeah, but it's a long-term investment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Long-term, it will get you there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, everybody. So, so if we look in a bit more detail around the kind of why, around the sort of the whole sort of strategic piece. So this, as I say, is where you're starting to try and get the real clarity, first of all. And this is where it's interesting. You're going through that poll. This is where you look at the whole kind of pain and payoff against the sort of financial side, but then against the people and the individual side. So I think, as I said before, the danger is that organisations only think of it in the context of money and not people. So you can see there in those sort of two boxes on the left hand side, they're all about sort of saying, what's the revenue gain going to be, what's the profit, what's it going to do to my bottom line, basically. And therefore they're often more comfortable to invest and put some money against it. But therefore people will always talk about people are at the heart of their organisation and people are really important. But I think often, unfortunately, those are words and people are not necessarily kind of meaning what they say. And therefore, the difficulty is that people will view perhaps the people side as causing a lot of disruption from a pain perspective. And therefore their perhaps can be reluctant to support it. But ultimately, if you get those people involved and you get them on the journey and you obviously sell to them what you're trying to deliver and you involve them throughout, then actually your payoff is going to be real kind of engagement, but also hopefully you're going to get retention. You're going to get people that feel loyal to an organisation and therefore want to stay as part of that organisation.
Absolutely.
But I think it is very much about thinking about that end goal. In the strategic piece, you need to think about where is it we want to get to, and ultimately why are we doing it? What's driving this? So you can get that clarity, you can get the buy-in with the organisation, and then you can start to kind of build on the back of it.
Absolutely.
So on the solution side, this is really the how, and this for me is really interesting when you talk about the as is and the to be. So lots of people will use the kind of terminology of as is and to be, and I think that the risk with any kind of change program is that people want to focus on the to be. They want to focus on the kind of exciting stuff. They want to focus on the future vision, and obviously that's really important. And it's really important to map out what that future vision looks like, and ultimately we're going to get to. But when you're planning your sort of change journey, you actually need to think about the reality of what happens today, because if you don't understand what happens today, it's then very difficult to build a journey, build a plan to move you from today's as is to the future to be. So I think what I find more and more within organizations, when we're brought in, it's about people thinking about, well, we're kind of there to look at the 2B and help them design the 2B. But actually, what we spend time doing is actually working with an organisation to actually ensure that they are focusing on their as is. And actually, we've sort of said to organisations that actually you need to dedicate time, you need to dedicate funding and resource to spending time on that as is, because people will view it as, well, we've got processes mapped, we kind of know what happens today. But actually, the danger is that, yes, there's a set of processes that are mapped and a big file that says it all, but actually that's not the reality of what actually happens. So I think the next poll, again, will be quite interesting because it talks really very much in that context of those kind of processes that are mapped.
Yeah, of course. So we've launched this poll. If everyone would like to take part and submit your answers, it's what percentage of your current processes or business operations do you believe are fully accurately documented? So please select one. Do you find that people aren't really documenting it as they go along?
Well, I think people will say it's documented, but I think the danger is, the real risk is that it's documented, but it's not reflective of what actually happens.
Right.
So, as I say, they sort of say, well, it's fine, we've got it, here's a process map. But the danger is as well, you look at a big kind of Visio diagram with a load of boxes on it, and you think, right, okay, that's interesting, but what does that actually mean? What's that actually telling us?
No one's giving detail. It's just kind of doing it to get things done.
Yeah, and does anyone really ever necessarily check to say that's what the process is, but is that what all the guys are actually doing?
Exactly. How does it translate to your employees as well? What do they see?
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got some results here. And the majority say it's between 30 and 49%. So around half.
Okay, that's good, actually, because I thought people would say higher, actually. So that is encouraging, because I think, as I say, people will think the processes are mapped. Reality of whether it reflects what happens today, but it's interesting that actually people are acknowledging that there's still a lot of processes that are unmapped.
But only 2% say above 90% of the processes are mapped. So
okay, that's encouraging. I think people recognise that then, which is good.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you again for that. I think, as I say, where we spend a lot of our time is really in this kind of solution piece, and really getting the clarity around how you get the real picture of what happens. So I find that if I go into organisations and I talk to organisations, the first thing I'll always want to do is get out and talk to the people that are doing the process. And you'll be amazed at how in some organisations people are surprised that almost you want to go out and talk to the people who are actually doing it. Now, I think some of that's a bit about my kind of retail heritage as well, because actually, when I was in retail, I always wanted to get out to the stores, meet the people, talk to the people. So actually, I think the only way you can get real understanding of the as is by getting out and talking to people, and potentially almost, even if you've got a process that's mapped at a high level, getting to kind of map what the process is that people are doing, because actually you can talk to somebody, but I've done it before where you start to then actually sort of draw out what somebody's doing, and people then start to say, oh, I didn't realize I did that. I didn't appreciate just how much I do. So actually it's really important to work with people to kind of get that clarity, but also to find out where people have potentially got those kind of manual workarounds. Because I think the tendency is to assume that there's a process, that's what they do. They don't have their own spreadsheets, they don't have their own sort of little ways of doing things. But again, the reality is they do. And actually, that's where this kind of root cause bit becomes quite important, because often the reason people have got manual workarounds in place is because actually the process isn't working. There's an issue with the process, therefore they've come up with a way of trying to work around it.
Yeah.
So again, getting out and talking to people, you get an understanding, you get some clarity on kind of what those issues are. And if you get some clarity on sort of the pain points of what you're trying to fix, again, you can ensure that your 2B, your future vision, you can actually ensure that, that's fixing those pain points, and you're not just almost making the matter worse again. It's kind of payoff versus pain again. So as I say, I've seen it lots of times where organizations kind of assume what happens, and therefore they miss some of those manual workarounds, and they only find out about it, say, when they go live with a new system, that then they realize they've missed a whole chunk of activity. So it's really important to invest time on understanding the as is, because I really believe it makes that future delivery of the kind of to be much easier if you invest some time up front.
Absolutely. Otherwise, it can be such a waste of an investment if it doesn't work for some part of the business.
Exactly. And you can't kind of define and draw a picture of what that sort of change journey needs to look like, because if you don't understand today, you're not going to be able to understand what's involved to move people. And again, this whole piece of trying to get people involve them in the journey. If you're involving them at the start, say, well, let's understand a bit more about what you actually do, what's involved, what some of your pains are. They're going to feel much more involved, and they will embrace the change ultimately.
Yeah.
Okay, so then it's really kind of getting into the what. So this is the sort of third pillar from the one I showed at the start, which is very much about kind of the kind of operational side of things. And to a degree, I'd say that if you've done the strategy and the solution stages well, this almost becomes the easy part. Now, don't all laugh at me when I say that, because I realise that there is a lot of work involved in the delivery of the kind of what. But I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that by having again invested time up front in getting clarity on that strategy and the solution, actually the process of then delivering it should be easier. As I say, it will still be complex, there's still challenges, but actually it should become a sort of smoother process to go through. So this aspect of the operational piece is really about how you involve the business, you engage the business, and as I say, you get people on that journey. So this is where you're going to need to think about some of those sort of commonly used terms of things like what does your stakeholder plan look like, what does your comms plan look like, what does your training journey look like. So this is where, as I say, you get into more of the kind of the nitty-gritty of the delivery, but as I say, it's really important you think about it, and you think about how you're going to kind of involve people in that. But I think from a sort of critical success factor point of view, it's easy to populate a stakeholder plan, populate a comms plan, but actually for me these sort of three boxes are, when you're thinking about how you operationalize and how you deliver some of these aspects, these are kind of three key areas to really think about. So if you think about the kind of the communication, a technique we always use is actually pulse checks. So these are about checking, the pulse of the organization as you're delivering your communications, actually checking in with people to say, how are these communications landing? And that's checking in with, all levels of the organization, checking with the senior guys to make sure they're kind of aware of what you're doing, but also, checking in with the, the operators, the people doing the doing, to again, making sure they're aware of these communications, it's landing, they understand what's happening, and therefore they understand the journey, and they're again kind of buying into it.
Exactly. Just gets them far more engaged with the whole movement as well.
Absolutely. And then when you think about the sort of then the modeling and the training new skills, this is where it's really important that you use the business to support you. So we always talk about kind of business champions and people involved in helping to sort of design what that training needs to look like, but then potentially also helping in some of the delivery. So actually, again, involving people that are used to doing it and will ultimately potentially do it in the the future world. Actually getting them involved will mean that they often get kind of better buy-in and almost better respect from individuals in an organization if they can see it's one of their team or somebody they respect and can relate to. So again, it's really important that you're thinking about how you're going to kind of model and land that training. But then also thirdly, and this is always a really interesting area for me, is this what we call hypercare. So this is really when you're kind of transitioning your change into business as usual. I think the big risk with any kind of change program is that people almost assume that once if it's a system and it's gone live, everyone can almost run off because it's done, they tick that box sort of thing. And actually you've got to be realistic about potentially what that kind of hypercare period looks like. So we always encourage our clients to build in some time to actually, support post go live. Now that could be, if it's a big change, a big system implementation, that could be a few months of support, because actually people are going to be getting used to things. They're going to be finding, things that don't quite work. Or it could be, if it's a much smaller change, it could just be a couple of weeks of having some people around. But this bit is where you can really start to ensure that you're delivering, and ultimately from a kind of senior stakeholder perspective, this is where you can see whether your benefits are starting to deliver, so you can kind of see whether you're realizing those benefits. So it's really important that people invest time, and as I say, people often overlook that phase and just want to kind of move on. So it's always a big learning to make sure people invest time in that.
They just think, okay, it's implemented now, here you go, but you still need people to go to for the advice and for help continue this journey, really.
Exactly. So I think we've got another poll coming up.
Yes, we do. So this one is about, where do you go for help when you're trying to implement change? If you please select one, that'd be brilliant. We'll give you a minute to vote with that. So yeah, I mean, where do you go for help, really?
Well, I mean, I think, this is where I think it's again about involving people at the right stage, because I think, potentially, depending on the level of change, you do need some kind of external expertise in terms of fresh eyes. But that's not necessarily saying that you need to kind of involve somebody throughout the whole process. It may be you just want somebody upfront to help with that sort of strategy piece. But the danger is that people kind of sort of talk about, if you're talking about change programs, they kind of assume, oh, we've got a comms team, for example, in-house comms team, we can kind of do it there. But actually, it's much more than just communications. So it'll be interesting to see again kind of what people say in terms of kind of where they go for support.
Exactly. I love that HR Grapevine's on there. That's so
Absolutely.
funny. Yeah, come to us for expertise. It's funny. Okay, so we've got about 73% of the votes in. I will just share these results. So the main place people go for change is in-house program management office.
Yeah. Okay. So I know I would say that, and I see the results, but that's what I'd expect people to say, because I think they kind of it's viewed that it can be done in-house. And as I say, don't get me wrong, I fully support using internal teams, but I think again it's about dedicating time for those internal teams, because I think there's a danger that people try and get people to almost do it as part of their day job. So therefore, exactly, it's hard to do. But I think depending on what that change is, it's recognising that there are points at which you need some other input from within an organisation, or potentially from external, to give you that kind of direction, that clarity, so you can then kind of start to build that journey.
Absolutely. It's quite surprising that only 7% would use an interim or a freelance consultant. So
yeah, I mean, I suppose for me that's because that might be around where people perhaps go to an individual, because they know an individual, as opposed to going to kind of an organisation. I think people, certainly within large businesses, there's always a view of, people want to go to one of the big consultancy firms, for example, because if they get kind of have got them involved, then the senior stakeholders will be happy, regardless of what they might be saying. They kind of assume that it's a good thing. Yeah, exactly. So I suppose it's encouraging that there's 18% on there. I think network recommendations is interesting as well.
Yeah.
That's where you do need to use your network. I was always taught to work your network, so I think that's really important.
Definitely. Brilliant.
Okay, great. Thank you for that one. So I guess just this is the sort of the final slide to just sort of summarize those three phases, really, in terms of, as I say, well, we've talked about the kind of the strategy, which, as I say, is very much the kind of the why, the solution, that's the how, and the operational, which is the kind of what. But I suppose if you ask me kind of sort of three takeaways around all of these, I suppose for me it's about being realistic is one of the key things throughout all of this, but then think about those different stages. So even if you're just thinking about it in, let's say, the context of the kind of the why, the how, and the what, I think it's really important that you're mindful of that as you go through, and as I say, you invest that time up front, thinking about it from a very much a strategic point of view of that kind of journey you want to embark on. But I think thirdly, and again, very easy for me to say, but it's about investing the time and the money to make sure the change lands successfully. So, as I say, even if it's just that you're going to do it internally with internal resources, you still need to potentially look at backfilling some resources. So you've actually giving them the time and the kind of space they need to kind of be involved in that. So those were kind of the key areas I was going to kind of go through on today's session, which I hope people have found useful. I think we've got some questions coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Simon. That was excellent.
Okay,
Really
brilliant.
detailed. Yeah, I had a couple of questions for you. So one of them is about HR's role. So as HR are quite instrumental in delivering change, how can they ensure that staff are on board? I know you spoke about kind of involving people from the beginning, but is there a strategy that you could recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it is about involving them throughout. It's not about kind of almost viewing them as an afterthought.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is the risk, that people are almost, say, viewed as something at a later stage. Almost once you get to that delivery, it's thinking about how you're going to actually, people view it as that's when nothing about the people side of things. Whereas actually, I think you need to involve them from the start. So when you're building that kind of strategy piece, you're involving the organisation to allow people to input and help shape some of that direction. That's how I think you'll kind of get the buy-in and the involvement of the individuals.
Yeah. So would you recommend kind of doing a employee survey before embarking on change, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, there's employee survey is a technique you can use. For me, it's about getting out and talking to people. So it's about interacting with people. So if you're very much looking at a payroll system, for example, it's about getting out and talking to the people who do payroll. But it's also potentially talking to people who are impacted by pay. How does someone's payslip look like? What are their frustrations around that payslip? So that they feel, again, they have the opportunity to kind of input into that direction. Appreciate you're not going to be able to take everything into account that someone asked for, but if you've given them the opportunity to kind of have input into that, again, hopefully when it comes to landing that change, it's going to be easier to get them to kind of buy into it because they've had some influence, some input at the start.
Yeah, that makes sense. People want their voice to be heard, especially upon this.
Absolutely.
I would like to say to the audience, this is where we open up the floor for questions, and we have got quite a few in, actually. We've got one here saying, could you bring a couple of examples of change enablers?
Change enablers, and I suppose it's that classic thing of, I suppose, what we mean by kind of change enabler. I mean, I think it's interesting when you think about how you kind of land that change. I suppose it would be good, I don't know who asked that question, but I don't know whether they could just perhaps give a little bit of clarity as to what they mean by a change enabler.
Yeah, of course, we can come back to that one. We also had another one saying who would be in charge of delivering training, for example, when it comes to change.
So, I mean, again, different organisations will have different functions within a business. So, they may well find that they have a sort of, training solutions team, for example, within the business to do some of that training. You might need the systems team involved to, you help with the training from a sort of systems expertise perspective. But I think, this is where, again, you need to involve people in actually delivering that training. So, in some of the programs we've done recently, we've used the system implementer, but we've also used people who are doing the current role to actually help deliver some of that training, or at least to help design that training, even if they're not confident enough to be physically doing the training. If they've had input into what that training design needs to look like, then again, they've kind of made it reality. So I think who's in charge for the training, I think that could be, as I say, lots of different people could be in charge depending on where it sort of sits within a function. But I think in terms of who inputs into that, it's again really important that you've got a variety of people inputting into that training design.
Absolutely. So we've got a bit of an elaboration on that initial question.
That would be great.
They're explaining that we've moved into the use of a new HR system, but what can enable users to adopt it quickly and effortlessly?
Okay, all right. So that's useful. Thank you for giving me more clarity on that. I think I think this is where, if you're thinking it from how you're going to kind of get that buy-in, I think it's about selling the benefits to the individual. So, what's going to make their life easier? And I suppose this is where, when I talk a bit about the pain points, that's where if you've got some clarity on sort of what those pain points are up front, that allows you to then, help people understand how it's going to address some of their pain points. Because ultimately, they may feel, for the guys that are using the new HR system, that initially it feels like a lot of pain, because potentially it's a very different world to the world they were currently working in. I think if you can sell some of those benefits, you can sell how it's trying to address some of those kind of pay points, then again, you will find that you should get quicker buy-in to those sort of change in the processes. I suppose it's also giving clarity around what sort of where the system sits in a day-to-day role, because again, some of the resistance when you're putting in a new system is they feel like it's about ultimately replacing the individual, but actually it's about freeing them up to have more time to do some of the stuff perhaps they should be doing. Certainly within HR, if people were getting caught up in kind of mundane administrative exercises, this is about actually giving them the time to perhaps do more HR activities, and have time to talk to individuals. So again, it's making them recognize that this is ultimately to allow them to hopefully as an individual get kind of more fulfillment from their role.
Absolutely, and that's something that we see a lot. There's so many headlines about automation taking jobs, but actually it's meant to help people become better at their jobs.
Absolutely.
But yeah, reducing those anxieties can be quite difficult.
Yeah.
Got a question here from Liz saying, how would you help HR teams remain personally resilient when going through change?
Personally resilient.
Both personally and professionally.
Yeah. And I suppose if that's in terms of from almost potentially some of the backlash of change, maybe, of how you remain resilient to that, I think it's a tricky one. I think it's about thinking about the ultimate goal of where you're trying to get to, and that recognizing change is difficult. It's not going to be an easy journey, but actually the end goal, the end result, will hopefully make everyone's life much easier. So I suppose it's a kind of an ongoing exercise, really, to make people feel that they are it's for the better good. And I suppose it's recognizing that people will have some of that backlash almost, but it's again giving people the support they need to vent some of their frustrations, and recognize that it's a new world, but hopefully ultimately it will, as I say, be a better world. Yeah, I don't know whether that helped. That sounded like quite a waffly answer, sorry, but it's a difficult one. I recognise it's a difficult one because it's difficult to remain personally resilient. But I think it's almost recognising it as the starting point, that you will have to be personally resilient.
Exactly. There's always backlash to change. Cultural change is one of the main ways or main obstacles to technology and being innovated in your own company. So, yeah, I mean, it's difficult. I agree. And in your opinion, what would be the main mistakes organisations run into when it comes to embarking on change? For example, do they kind of rush into it, or are they inspired by what other organisations are doing and rush into that as well and not really thinking about how it could apply to their own firm?
Yeah, so I mean, my belief is that and this is why when I say at the start about I don't really like the phrase change, is that a lot of organisations view it as that sort of that right hand pillar, the kind of operational piece. So they just view the sort of the change aspect as that. And they think about very much focusing on that and delivering that operational piece. They don't think about the bits up front. So, the as-is, I know I've hopped on about it, but that's a really good example of where people don't think about that. They just think about the future vision, the future view of where they want to get to. They don't spend time on actually understanding what they do today. They don't spend time designing those sort of principles of what they want the system to deliver, what some of those pain points are. And as I say, if people spend time on those first two stages up front, then it will make the kind of operational side much easier. So I think, for me, one of the biggest mistakes is not investing time up front before they get into the kind of operational delivery aspect.
Well, thank you very much, Simon, and thank you to our audience. If you have any other questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box or send us an email. But I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thanks very much for your time.